Hey, I'm Jenna Wolf, certified lactation counselor, parent coach, and extended breastfeeding mom of two. I fully understand the unique challenges of breastfeeding beyond the baby days, and I'm here to take your hand and support you along your journey. So toss that hair in a messy bun, grab a basket of laundry to fold, and let's get started. This is Start to Stop Toddler Breastfeeding. I am coming at you from my sister's house today. They recently moved into their home, so I'm in their upstairs, which is currently uninhabited by the occupants of the house. They don't really do too much up here. So it's generally quiet, but they have a couple dogs, and you may hear some dogs. My kids are downstairs playing with their cousin, hanging out with my sister, so it's possible you'll hear some background noise. I also share this because, like real life, real talk, I homeschool my kids. I run a business from my house. My husband also runs a business from our house. I have ADHD. It is tough sometimes to just do simple things to keep my house running, to have time to record this podcast, to do the things I need to do. And I'm not always sure that we're honest enough about that as moms. I know we can talk about like our kind of like internal guilt and these kinds of pieces, but also just the reality that like if you walk into my house 95% of the time, there's very likely to be snacks out somewhere, a box of markers tipped over and like markers splayed about, and probably some clothes on the floor. There's probably a counter that has some clutter on it. 1000% there are dishes either on the counter or in the sink at any point. I am in my house like all the time, right? Like this is just the reality. And I say that because, this week I went to a friend's house and, we kind of went over there last minute. My daughter's best friends with her daughter, and it's like, oh, like it's last minute. I didn't expect to have people over, so like my house isn't very clean. And then, I go to clients' houses and like they're apologetic because of like the way that their house looks, and it literally just looks lived in by a family, particularly a family with young kids. And so, honestly, if you feel like a bit ashamed of your home, or maybe your home runs pretty smoothly and is nice, but like you feel like, it takes a lot of work, like you're not crazy. Okay. Also, yes, there's lots of resources I can recommend. And my ADHD brain just wants to hop around to all of those things. But I just wanted to be honest and real about that today because I'm not always sure that I, on this podcast, am just like open about, like I feel ashamed of my house sometimes. Like, truthfully, these things are just real and working through it, right? But I also just want to be like open and real about that because, yeah, like maybe you do too. Anyway, that was my soapbox for the moment. Today's topic is actually about milk supply. And this kind of relates because I do go to clients' homes. And I kind of mentioned that like often when I go into clients' homes, they're, struggling. But not even struggling. Like their home just looks lived in, like there's activities, there's things out, the like things are not pristine. It doesn't look like a museum or like a hotel, like, lobby or something. Like because guess what? You're just living in your house, right? Anyway, so my point is I go to people's homes. And I go to people's homes generally for uh, in-home lactation visits that are more often than not a baby that is under 4 months old. Sometimes these babies are super fresh and super cute, and sometimes it's a little bit older. But in these consults, I am talking about, like with moms, about milk supply, about latch, about, all of those pieces, the really practical stuff that, of course, we think of when we think of breastfeeding. Um, and I'm really glad that I can still continue to do that I still continue to do these home visits because these visits cause me to continue to work on my skills, to continue to get more education about these essential pieces of lactation because they really continue to translate into toddler breastfeeding. They absolutely do. I see moms all the time on Facebook groups, on Instagram saying like, okay, my toddler just latched and they said there was no milk. I must be drying up. This is the end of our breastfeeding relationship. What do I do? And then I look in the comments and there's all these people that are like, you have to start pumping and you have to start doing these things. And, um, you know, translating essentially what you would tell a mom of maybe a 3-month-old who's struggling with supply into the mom with a 3-year-old. Now, yes, there are things that follow through. Like the way that milk is produced, it's not always the same. Like there's pieces, like there's time frames where things are a little bit different, but like generally speaking, once you're producing mature milk, like that's just always going to continue to happen that way. So there are pieces that are very like, consistent and similar. And yet there are big differences between milk supply in, day 5 postpartum and year 5 postpartum. So it's important to understand that. And a lot of times as well, we can have picked up myths from our early breastfeeding experiences just from our lack of education, right? I've talked about this before, but we don't have this breastfeeding knowledge. It depends on where you are in the world. We are now, I should say, this podcast has been out for almost 3 months now, and it is being listened to in every continent and almost 40 countries around the world, over 400 cities around the world. People are listening to this podcast, and it's super exciting. Anyway, so perhaps you live in an area where their breastfeeding is still valued and sacred, and the knowledge has been continued to be passed down through generations. And so there isn't as much of a, this knowledge deficit or gap. But likely you live in an area where breastfeeding isn't the norm. I've said before, in Windsor, Essex, Ontario, Canada, where I live, our breastfeeding rates are dismal. We have the lowest breastfeeding rates in the province. At, 6 months, only 16% of babies are breastfed. So the majority of babies are not, which means that the information that we get can often be incorrect, right? Because the people around us don't really know, because it's not really the cultural norm anymore. So sometimes we pick up these myths, well intended, but for example, something I might hear somebody say is like, I drank a lot of water today, so I should have more milk supply. With this idea, kind of an erroneous connection that, the amount of liquid that you consume directly correlates to the amount of milk that you produce, which it's not the case, but it's something that I see moms pick up a lot. Or even just that, the type of food that you're eating is going to affect your baby in different ways. And these things are just actually not true. So in this podcast episode, I want to talk about milk supply. I want to talk about what it means to dry up when you're breastfeeding, and like when to be concerned as an extended breastfeeding mom or a mom breastfeeding an older baby or toddler that your milk has dried up, when you need to think about that, and what things you can do to support yourself if that's the case, and when it's likely not actually the case and what else might actually be going on. So that's a lot to cover, and I'm already like 7 minutes into this podcast. Sorry for being rambly today, guys. Y'all love me, right? Okay, first, let's just put on our science hats for like a minute. And just imagine I've got this nice big chalkboard here and I've got my, pointer stick. We're going to start with a little science lesson about the way that your body develops to produce breast milk. So it actually begins at about 4 weeks gestation. And when I mean 4 weeks gestation, I mean when you were at 4 weeks gestation inside of your parents' belly, womb. When you were when you were an embryo, okay? And that's when these things called milk streaks form, and they like stretch across the abdomen to the groin. It's just tiny little thing. You're just a little heartbeat on a screen, right? At 4 weeks. So that's actually when the cells are there and things start to differentiate around 12 weeks, where those cells, those milk streaks, start to turn into different parts of the anatomy, like your nipples and your areola and all of these things. Again, inside of the womb at 12 weeks. And then you continue to develop, right, as you're going through gestating inside of the womb. And sex hormones from the parent's placenta actually cause the chest of the newborn to grow larger and produce colostrum even themselves. And this happened actually with my daughter. When they're born, sometimes they actually have little like milk buds, and they have little like little drops of milk that can appear on their little newborn nipples. So that happened to you. That's when your body started to develop what you are now using to feed your child. And your chest, your breast tissue continues to develop throughout even your earliest childhood experiences. But everything really gets kicked up a notch in early adolescence, around, age 10-ish or so. Generally just before puberty. And the crazy thing is, so like that's when things start to grow a little bit. And then once you hit puberty, your body actually begins building new parts inside of your chest every single ovulatory cycle. So every time you have like ovulate and like menstruate, new structures are being built inside of your breast, your chest. Like new pieces are growing and changing up until like your mid 30s, about age 35-ish. Things continue to build and grow, but your breasts actually never finish developing until you become pregnant. And that is when your milk making, pieces actually become fully functional. Okay. So if you never are pregnant, then your breasts, never fully finish developing in that sense, as far as like making milk goes. So that's something called mammogenesis. So that is when your mammary glands are developing and growing and changing. And again, it begins when you were an embryo and continues on until your mid 30s. And it's just really wild for me to think like every single time you hadn't, ovulated, like new parts of your breasts were being built. And then when you're pregnant, you'll notice that there's physical changes that happen to your breast because, again, structures are being built and things are coming into form and shape and it's getting all ready to go. And you will start producing milk during pregnancy. And we'll get to that in a moment. But what can be interesting to think about here is the fact that there's so much like happening throughout your life that you likely didn't consider, right? That can impact the way that your breast develops. So if there was like a traumatic injury, in adolescence in particular, or sometimes even things like hormonal birth control that can change your hormones that are actually, of course, influencing your ovulation and influencing the way that your breasts are developing. Sometimes that can impact your ability to breastfeed down the line, your ability for your body's to produce milk, right? Like for those milk ducts and for everything to start working like as it was intended to, as your body was developing, the actual outcome that could have happened might have gotten stopped or interfered with at a certain point. So that's something that like in a lactation consult that somebody would be looking into that history. And sometimes people don't know why we ask about adolescent experiences or when they were on birth control as a teenager or these pieces, but it can be really important. So that's something called mammogenesis. And it's very fascinating to me. But let's move on to lactogenesis. So mammogenesis is in, building of the mammary glands. And then we've got like, the whole deal, the building of the breast. And then we've got lactogenesis, which is like the creation of the milk. And of course, I'm breezing over a lot of things. And there's a lot of technical stuff that's very fascinating to me, but I'm not going to get into that for you guys today. I'll just blow your minds with just a little bit of science. So there's lactogenesis, like stage 1, which begins around your second trimester and goes through until about day 2-ish postpartum, where your body is creating colostrum. So I know you've been breastfeeding for long enough, about colostrum, but just for a very quick recap, and because I find this very, very interesting, there are like cells inside of the walls of your breasts, like the ducts and whatnot. There's more technical terms, but I'll keep it at that for right now. That during this time, they're actually a little bit open, and everything begins to swell with colostrum, and it actually allows a different amount of protein and antibodies, different things to enter into the milk duct where the milk is being created. So that's why colostrum is actually different than mature milk. It's because the walls are a little loose. So they actually allow bigger cells to pass through. And this can also, and it's perfect for your baby. This is what your baby needs. It's just so wild how the body does that. and the way that it does that is by these cells kind of like loosening in order for that stuff that needs to pass through to pass through. And this can also mean that certain medications might not be safe to breastfeed with during that time, but may be safe later, and vice versa because of the way that stuff passes through. It's very interesting. But that's when your body starts to create colostrum. And again, colostrum's wonderful. But then we have this lactogenesis 2. So this next stage where there's this really fast drop in progesterone levels, caused by the placenta detaching from the wall of the uterus. So when that placenta detaches, we have, the progesterone levels drop and a whole bunch of other hormones rise, and it causes the shift in the volume of milk that is created, as well as it causes those cellular walls to tighten up. And we have this tight junction that happens, and it changes the milk from being that yellow, like thick honey or thin honey, sorry, consistency to this more yellowish white mature milk that's increasing in volume. And so that tends to happen for, about a week or so, that you have this kind of transition period. This is a really important time because if milk removal is not sufficient during this lactogenesis 2, so we have the stage from, about 2 days postpartum for that week, then, engorgement is likely to occur. So that's when, breasts swell, and there's lots of other tissue in your breast and fluids in your breast aside from just milk, but it can cause engorgement. And if that engorgement isn't moved, right? If the removal is not happening, then what will happen is the milk will revert from mature milk back to colostrum. So that is kind of like drying up, right? Like that's happening. And then we have lactogenesis 3. So we have that creation of colostrum, then we have this transition milk, and then we have mature milk. So hormones are still really important, right? Remember how in that lactogenesis 2, it's those hormonal changes that are causing the milk volume to increase, and it's causing, the cell walls to tighten up, and it's causing all these changes. What happens in lactogenesis 3 is that the breasts become they run kind of more autonomously. There's still hormonal changes that are like that influence things. It's still a factor, but more or less we transition into this supply and demand phase. So it's at this phase where, the amount of milk that you remove is the amount of milk that your body makes, right? Like it becomes this kind of system, generally speaking. And so the way that the body, it's, you know, the way that it's being stimulated to remove the milk is important, right? So the latch has to be effective, right? The baby has to be able to draw the milk, transfer the milk in order for it to be removed, right? In order for you to produce more milk. So sometimes what can happen is that like as this hormonal shift is changing and it's shifting from being hormonally driven to supply and demand driven, there can be like inefficient removal of milk, which can kind of be hidden because like the hormones are still driving it to some degree. So like things can look okay, and then it can suddenly kind of like drop off when the body really switches into supply and demand. So that's something that can happen. But that once that happens and things are switched into supply and demand and your supply becomes more and more established over time, remember how I said before, if within 2 weeks if your milk removal isn't like effective, it's going to switch back to colostrum. But then we have this last phase of lactogenesis, which is called involution. And that is when essentially, remember how your breast is like building in all of these structures with every ovulatory cycle, as you're aging, and then you hit pregnancy, and now things are actually getting built to produce milk, right? Like really produce milk. Involution is when those milk making pieces start to kind of die off. Like the structures are no longer there. It doesn't need to be there. And that actually takes about 40 days to happen on average. And some women they're able to produce milk for months or years afterwards. It's hand express and a little milk comes out, right? This is such a critical understanding for us as, full-term toddler breastfeeding moms for a lot of different reasons. Number one is that if your milk dips a little bit, you're probably not drying up, right? And of course, if the demand starts to increase, then the milk will come back and like will be plentiful again. Obviously barring some things like as long as your hormones haven't changed or things haven't happened, right? Like, but if it's just a matter of like supply has or demand has decreased, so supply has decreased, increasing demand will increase supply. So that's important to know. So it's unlikely that you've just dried up for no good reason. In fact, if you have dried up for no good reason, then definitely speak to your doctor or find a lactation consultant because again, there could be something that happened with your child's mouth or latch. There could be something that's happening, or there could be something hormonally that's happening that you want to get investigated, right? Um, so that could happen. Oh, and I also want to say too, if you are able to express milk and you're not breastfeeding, that can be a change, like a sign of some hormonal issues or other issues. So just as a caveat, if you unexpectedly or somebody unexpectedly is able to produce milk, have them see a doctor. Just want to rule some things out because that can, it can be a sign of something awry in the body, right? So just putting that out there. And of course, this is not medical advice. I'm not giving you medical advice. I'm just explaining what's happening in the average body as it matures through these phases, right? Of mammogenesis and lactogenesis. Okay, so we've got this milk structures dying off that take about 40 days. So you have a lot of time, right? So let's talk about that child that looks up at you and says, "Mama, there's no milk." Sometimes your child has gotten used to a decently fast flow. And so it might not have anything to do with your milk supply. You might just have like a flow that isn't as fast in that moment. And the child is just, if they're old enough to communicate with you, they might just be like, I don't want to wait for the milk. Right. And it could be that they just breastfed a lot recently and they came back and they're kind of sleepy and they're like, wait, there's no milk. Or if you're tandem feeding like I am, sometimes another child will have just breastfed a lot. And it's not that there's no milk there. It's just that it's not flowing as fast as they would like it to be right then. Right. Um, so the milk's still coming, it's still there, but it's just not as fast as they would like it to be. So that can absolutely happen. In which case, sometimes there are things like teething that can be affecting your child's latch. It could be illness. They could have a stuffy nose. They could have those things going on that you might not even be fully aware of. And actually, that is why they're looking up at you and saying, Mommy, there's no milk here, right? Another thing could be that you're on your period or you're, soon to be on your period. So a lot of times, the hormonal changes can be affecting your milk supply, but this is temporary. So taking calcium and magnesium for a couple weeks before your period can really help with this, but it might just be a dip. And sometimes, it's just a one-off thing where your child will notice it during one cycle and not another. That can have to do with the fact that your hormones are a bit messy when you're breastfeeding and the hormonal cycles around your period aren't always consistent. So maybe your supply dips a little more during one period than it did another time. But it, again, might not be that you're drying up. It could just be like a temporary thing. Another piece can be illness. So generally speaking, a virus itself or being sick itself is unlikely to be the thing that causes your milk supply to dip. But the stress from it, which we're going to talk about stress, but if you're not eating well and drinking well and doing those pieces, it could cause your supply to temporarily dip. Now, as I said before, drinking a whole lot of water isn't going to magically make your supply increase, and eating a whole lot of food isn't going to make your supply magically increase. But not drinking enough water and not eating enough calories can cause your supply to decrease. Like we know that you have to eat about 1,800 calories a day in order for your milk supply to be consistent. So if you're eating less than that, now of course everybody's body is different. This is an average based on studies that were done. And if you just are a smaller person and you need less calories in a day, then that, it might be a little less for you. But generally speaking, there's a threshold that you need to hit. Eating more doesn't necessarily mean more milk. Okay. But of course, when we're ill, sometimes we're not eating enough, right? Like because we physically can't, and your body's energy is going to other places. So it makes sense that your supply might dip a little bit. Again, this is temporary. This is not something that's going to last forever. Um, Try to take care of yourself as best as you can in those cases. And of course, when your milk supply starts to decrease, the amount of immunological factors increases. So even if your child's only getting a tiny little bit of milk during that time, especially if you're sick, they are still getting a big dose of the antibodies that are in your body. That's increasing. So the relative dose stays somewhat the same, somewhat consistent. Okay, let's talk about stress for a moment. So, stress does not decrease your supply. Okay, stress does not decrease your supply. However, oxytocin is what allows, or what it's a really important hormone in the flow of milk. Okay, so for a letdown to occur, which is when the milk ducts and like essentially there's little muscle spasms, happening, this reflex happening inside of the breast that is causing the milk to flow quickly. Things are getting squeezed and it's causing the milk to flow, which means that the child doesn't have to work for it as hard during that time, right? Like it's coming on its own. So in order for that to occur, there has to be oxytocin. Oxytocin is what triggers that. Now, when you are stressed out, you're likely not having a ton of oxytocin in your body, okay? Oxytocin is the love hormone. It's a feel-good hormone. It's something you get when you're laughing and looking at cute puppies. It's even what happens when you orgasm. So if you are not experiencing a ton of oxytocin, it can happen where your milk flows more slowly than it has in the past. This can be a reason why your little kiddo looks up at you and says, "Mama, I don't feel the milk." You know, I've seen cases where parents are, like a breastfeeding parent is going through a separation, or a family member has passed away, or somebody's ill. Like these things are really real and heavy. Um, and that is totally valid to have these stress. And it doesn't necessarily mean, now, of course, over time, if you keep offering less and less, because the milk isn't flowing, or you're concerned you're drying up and you're not offering as frequently, or your child just doesn't drink as frequently, yes, that will cause your milk supply to eventually dry up. That will cause lactogenesis stage 4, involution, where those milk producing structures start to die off, right? But again, if you increase demand, the supply will come back. So we talked about, like, if it's around your period and it's hormonal, then taking magnesium and possibly calcium for those 2 weeks before can be supportive. If you're ill, make sure that you're taking, just take care of yourself. Make sure you're eating enough food and drinking enough water. And then if you're stressed, well, we got to get that oxytocin flowing. So, you can do things like mindfulness and practice those pieces, or you can, put on a hilarious movie, like something that's going to make you laugh. That can be really helpful. Also, just recognizing, this is some stress and it's causing the milk to flow a little more slowly. Okay, what can we do to take care of this, right? Because what can happen is if you're worried that you're drying up, that will actually increase your stress and it becomes a vicious cycle. So what I encourage a lot of times parents to do, just like you would create a birth plan, right? And you a lot of moms, perhaps in the natural birth world or those kinds of things, you're going to get the lights and the candles and the essential oils and the music and the affirmations up on the wall and all of those things. Try to create like a breastfeeding plan when it comes to, this. So have a space where you feel calm, where you feel supported, where you feel loved. That feels really good for you. This is not a place that you think would be Pinterest worthy, that somebody else would want to do. This is a place for you. And I would encourage you to consider your 5 senses. So we have more than 5 senses. That's another episode, but let's talk about touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell, right? So think of those 5 things and get one thing that feels really amazing to you for that sense. So maybe for touch, it's a really plush blanket, right? Or maybe you really enjoy a fidget spinner or something in your hands. Like that's cool. Whatever feels really great for you. Taste. Do you just love some water? Do you love water with lemon? Do you love water with, I don't know, something else? Or do you love a coffee or whatever it could be, or a snack? something that really you enjoy, you personally, a scent that really just you love. Is it vanilla? Is it cinnamon? Is it lavender? It doesn't have to be an essential oil. It could be anything. Like if you just love the smell of a deodorant you have, I don't care. Just put that deodorant on right beforehand or keep the stick nearby you, right? We're engaging that sense. Oops, I just dropped my phone. That was probably loud for you. Or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Sometimes these block things out. Anyways, getting derailed. I have ADHD. So we went through, uh, the taste and the touch and the smell. So then sound. Do you want to listen to a podcast? Maybe it's a hilarious one. Maybe it's this one. Maybe I make you feel really loved. I don't know. Or maybe it's music, right? Or maybe it's like a white noise, whatever feels really great for you. And then sight. Do you want to look at a picture of, your little one? Do you want to just embrace your small one, like in your arms right there? And just maybe the smell is just the smell of their hair, right? Maybe your touch is just a touch of their skin and their hair. Like that's okay too. Or maybe you want to watch something hilarious on TV, right? Now, of course, when we've got these older nurslings, it's not as easy to put all those pieces together. But when you're going through a really stressful time, I would absolutely support you to do this. It's going to bring your cortisol levels down. It's going to bring your oxytocin levels up. It's going to help your child continue. It's going to help you to continue your breastfeeding journey without having an end that wasn't how you wanted it to be, right? That wasn't premature or feel like you're losing something else during this really stressful time. So I hope that that was supportive for you. So just to kind of like recap, we talked about how your breasts have been being created, your chest has been being developed since you were just a little embryo yourself, right? And then you've been producing milk since you were pregnant with your little one. And there's so much going on that is actually outside of your control with hormones and all of those pieces. And then yeah, it became supply and demand, right? Like it did. But you've maintained that supply and demand for a long time now. If you're breastfeeding, a child over the age of 1 and your supply is not fragile anymore, it's not likely to just disappear. You can absolutely breastfeed part-time and maintain your supply. Like that's 1000% within the realm of possibility. And if you notice that it feels like you're drying up, it seems like things aren't like they used to be. It could be because you're on your period. It could be because of illness. It could be because of stress. And I supported you in how to walk through those pieces and some things you can try to, maximize your breastfeeding, your breast milk production, the flow of milk so that you can continue on breastfeeding as long as you would like to in whatever way feels great for you. And just remember that it takes a long time. It takes more than a month for your body to, stop producing milk, and it will continue to produce milk for a really long time afterwards. So it's unlikely that you've caused any kind of damage that cannot be undone. If you're talking about like, oh, I didn't breastfeed for, a couple days, or my child had this going on or whatever. That's very unlikely. And also that if you are drying up, if you're trying to drop your milk supply, it takes time. It really does take time. And your body's going to be going through a lot of changes during that time. That can be, tough. And that's going to be a topic for another podcast episode when I will talk about post-weaning depression, but that's a really real thing. And yeah, I hope that that was supportive for you. I see this in my DMs all the time, these questions about milk supply and concerns about milk supply. So I hope that my science lesson was exactly what you needed to hear today. And if you are listening to this right now, I am super excited to see you over in the Breastfeeding Beyond Babyhood Summit that is happening next week. I've already seen a bunch of you join, and I will be in the Facebook group. So make sure that you hop in there for the Breastfeeding Beyond Babyhood Summit and tag me in a post, reach out, say hi. I love meeting all of you. I love the DMs. So make sure you send them in. And if you feel like it, write a review for this podcast. I'd love to see it too. All right. I will catch you in the next episode. If you loved this episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any episodes in the future. Also, check out my breastfeeding toddler communication guide and cheat sheet to learn how to say no to the feed while still saying yes to the need at www.ownyourparentingstory.com/guide. And that concludes another episode of Start to Stop Toddler Breastfeeding. The theme song is Little Balloon by Jenny and Tyler, and it has been a pleasure to share this time with you. I'll catch you in the next episode.